Hi, I'm Jo Wright, the Creative Director at Take Two. I'd like to acknowledge the Gundungurra people who are the traditional owners of the land where I'm coming to you from today. Some people unwind with a book or a TV show, and many of us who watch or listen to this Friday Feature Artists series will find their unwind with a paintbrush, a pencil, or if you're like me and Amanda Nadig, it'll be a needle and thread. Every single day, no matter how exhausted Amanda is after teaching high school art in Chicago's public schools, she carves out time to quilt because, as she puts it, she needs to. Amanda's quilts are bold, unexpected, and full of personality. Think vintage 80s prints, fuzzy textures, sheer fabrics, unexpected shapes, and plenty of hand-stitched details. If you think that sounds fun, you're not wrong. And since falling in love with quilting in 2019, she's been obsessed, blending tradition with experimentation, and even bringing her students along for the ride with spray paint, felting, and wild textile mashups. Today we'll talk to Amanda about how she juggles teaching, motherhood, and her own art practice, the thrill of secondhand fabric hunting, and why she'll never quit quilting. So settle in, perhaps with a quilt on your lap, because you're about to catch some serious creative chills. And just a warning, if you're not already a quilter, watch out, we may well tempt you. One of the things I love most about the fibre art and mixed media community is their passion for connecting and sharing. If you enjoy this conversation, please subscribe and share it with someone in your circle, a fellow artist, a friend who loves stitching, or anyone who would be inspired by a creative journey. Amanda is our 163rd Friday Feature Artist, and you can revisit all interviews through our website at fiberartstake2.com. This will also be our 8th official podcast episode, and I'm so excited to bring you this conversation. Let's get started. Hi, Amanda. How are you?
Hi, Jo. What a wonderful video introduction. Thanks for saying all of that. That's so sweet.
Oh, my pleasure. It was actually just so much fun to put it together. I'm a quilter, but regardless of that, your images are just so joyful and just show so much color and texture and vibrancy. So yeah, it was just a dream to sit through the images and think about your creative practice.
Cool.
So how's your day been?
My day is great. I am a full-time teacher, as you said, in Chicago, but we have our spring break this week. So we have a week off. Usually you think of spring break as being warm and it's pretty cold here, but that's okay because I can stay inside and sew, which is what I'm really loving catching up on. So
did you get some stitching done today?
I did. I stitch every day, but I do a little extra. I did some actual cleaning today, which maybe looking behind me doesn't seem clean to you, but this is really organized for me. This is a really small home studio that I can see the kitchen and I can see the where my family hangs out. So there's doors with windows. And so I'm really close to everyone, but I'm also kind of like, I have my own little space. And most people my family doesn't really come in here. They might to look for scissors or something, but so I straightened it but it inspired me. It's going to inspire me to make more work this weekend before I go back to school. So
yeah, I think the space looks fantastic. And in some ways, perhaps if you keep it messy, they might not come in. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
it's just no floor space. What are you going to do?
Yeah, it might be dangerous. The needles on the ground. And
yeah, that too. Hazardous.
Yeah, they do sometimes.
Yeah. So one of the questions I really like to kick off with, because we're coming live on YouTube and Facebook, but we also drop these episodes now as a podcast. So while I mention that, it's worth noting to anybody who's listening to make sure you check out the show notes and the episode description. We will post the images that we show in this conversation of Amanda's work so that you can also enjoy that beautiful color and richness and texture. But one of the questions I always like to start off with is for someone who's listening or someone who's just never come across your work before, how would you describe it, Amanda?
Okay. Yeah, because sometimes people ask me what kind of art I make and I say quilts. But that's just, I think a lot of folks go to one thought when I think of quilts, which is fine. But I think my quilts are usually 3 layers or more. They have a center puffy part that can be small. Like sometimes I like them thinner and sometimes they're poofier. They have a backing and a front type of patchwork, but there are a lot of hand stitching that you can see. So if you know the difference between like a machine and a hand stitch, there's definitely a lot of visible hand stitching. I enjoy that more. And they're just really painterly. So you think of quilts with lots of repetition. And while I do love repetition, there's a lot of asymmetry. So it's they kind of could look like a painting from far away, which I kind of enjoy.
I thought I'd pull up some images while you're talking
Yeah, and
because
this one that you're showing right now is actually painted. I was doing a lot of that this summer.
yeah.
So this actually has actual paint on found white fabric. So, but a lot of times just the way I applique found shapes or I don't, it's very organic. I don't use a rotary cutter. So the way I rip the fabric or find the shapes already in like an organic shape, then I'll just applique it down like that. So sometimes they're kind of, the lines are very wavy and slightly geometric, but more organic. So
Yeah.
I think that's how I describe it. And a lot of bright colors, as you said. A lot of pink. I don't know. It just happens.
I think for some of the quilters listening, just the simple line of "I don't use a rotary cutter"
Yeah.
might just explain so many things
Yeah,
about
I
your
think
work.
that helps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. It's always so interesting to hear an artist describe their own work. And as we go through today and I show some work, I might ask you to do the same thing, is to describe it for us, because it's easy to overlay a perception, but it's always so much more interesting to hear the artist describe the work themselves. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you was, what was it about quilting? What got you hooked? What is it in particular, knowing that perhaps you've dabbled in lots of different creative fields and you're a high school art teacher? What was it about quilting that sinked its claws in?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved fabric patterns. My mom was a quilter. I grew up with quilts. I didn't think that is something I could do because I'm not very like, I don't really enjoy like measuring. And I just felt like, so, but I think what kept bringing me back to different types of textile art before I settled back into quilting with like a different outlook on it was just like the textures. And I also started quilting like I made quilts a long time ago, but the real kickoff in 2019 when I quilted every day. I've quilted every day since, except for one day when I was really sick. That started really because I had young children, and it was a medium, unlike paint, acrylic paint that I was doing before, that I could easily like take with me and go to the park, and something I could do instead of being on my phone, like on a park bench or at a swim lesson, and it's something I could be interrupted a lot and just drop and and kind of do alongside my kids while they're playing. And I think
Yeah,
that's the mobility of it. Yeah, I think that's
yeah, that pick up, put downableness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly.
You can shove it in a bag. You can take it somewhere you need to go. You can
Mm-hmm.
sneak in grabs of stitching.
Yes, I think that's what really. And with paint, I love the immediacy of acrylic paint. And I was even painting on wood with fabric glued on the wood. So I was even playing around with layering fabric, but
Mhm.
what I was noticing is it just took me so long to mix the colors trying to get, and then by the time I would like mix a color, I'd have to go like boil water for dinner or something. So I find like working with fabrics, like the way you can kind of see my studio is I can just see all the colors. They're all ready to go. They're not like paint where I have to keep them covered. They're just like, I'm ready to grab any of these. And often I'll just grab one and the whole thing falls down, but that's why it gets messy here. But I just have all the blues. Well, behind me, you see I have a lot of pinks, and I could see like, I could study it and just see, I don't have to mix those, but there's just so many variations of them. And I think that's what's
Yeah.
exciting about fabric. It's a palette,
Yeah.
like ready to go.
I guess I've never thought too much about that, but I guess as a medium, it is just a bit more forgiving that the medium isn't, well, it does determine a lot about how you might stitch or how you might put things together, but there's no drying time, or there's no sort of like essential layering, like specific layering you have to do for it to just even work. Or I guess there's sort of a forgivingness, just also that it's pliable.
Yeah, definitely.
You can sculpt it and stretch it as you need to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think acrylic paint, I noticed, and I would work small, like during nap time or whatever, but I wouldn't even say I had like an everyday practice, but I did like to work on several at once because I wanted the layers to dry so that I could quickly sand them or like put something else on top. And you're right, like I don't have to wait much with fabric. It's just ready to go. I can work quickly, and I still do work on several pieces at the same time. So probably because of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. You've said before that quilting is actually something you need to do. And I would love to understand what that need feels like. I think a lot of people relate to the need to create, but I'm interested for you what that means.
Yeah, I think about like what I was doing at home, like to keep my hands busy, like while watching TV or like going to a baseball game, like there's another ticket. I'm not a huge sports fan, so you'll see me there watching and eating, but I will be stitching. Like I think busy hands. I wonder if a lot of our audience out there knows kind of like some people just have to keep their hands busy, and I think it's just that need to do something. And then also just, especially, I'm such a visual person. Like if my closet is closed, like I think the door is closed, I think I don't have any clothes. It's like I have what I can see. So that's why all my fabric's stored. So just like it's just so inviting. Like I have to put these together and see what's going to happen. I think it's just so exciting to think like all the what ifs. It's just, and then also just the meditative quality. I mean, that's number one, probably, just and that's something I get from just handwork for me, just the repetitive over and under into fabric. Which is why I mainly just pick fabric that just really feels good in my hand. And I do wear a thimble, so I need it to always feel comfortable because like then I could just stitch for hours. Like I in fact sometimes if I have nothing to do, which doesn't happen a lot, but if there happens to be a day, like I'll get cramps because I'm like, oh, nothing's stopping me. I'm just gonna keep stitching until someone's like, I'm hungry. Can you feed us? My kids are getting older, so they can like start taking care of themselves. They make a sandwich now. They're a little older. Yeah, I just need that repetitive. It's just so calming for me.
Yeah. I think lots of our audience will relate to lots of those different aspects of it. I know I relate to the idea of keeping my hands busy. If I'm sitting at dinner with the kids and they're taking their time, time seems to go a lot faster if I have some stitching or some crochet or just something to keep my hands busy.
Yes,
It's funny how that happens.
Yeah, you're
Mm.
kind of where your kids are the age of kind of where my kids were at when I started stitching a lot, and I think it's also I went through a little bit of guilt, like, should I be like, I think some people thought it was work, but for me, it was like, that wasn't work, that's just my relaxation. It's not,
Yeah.
and so, but then I was like, well, I want my kids to see, do they think I'm just sewing all the time when I'm not working? But then I realized, well, then they started making things alongside me, and I'm like, oh, well, they're seeing an artist working and they're
Yeah.
using their hands and they're always making things out of repurposed materials, not fabric really. They're kind of
Yeah.
over fabric. They're kind of, they like to use cardboard and do a lot of drawing. And so I now look back, I'm like, I wish I didn't feel bad or guilty
Yeah.
for always sewing when they were little because, I mean, they're still little. I have a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old, but now I'm just like, oh, it's so good that they see just a creative home and that they're just a part of, making, being a maker. I don't know. So
Yeah. Yeah. I often wonder the same thing. Do they see a difference between when I go to work and when I'm going to the sewing machine or when I'm stitching? But I see the same thing, if I sit down at the dining table to start sketching or even just journaling some ideas, whatever it might be, they sort of start circling around and joining in, and
yeah,
that
I
can
love
be a good
that.
thing. Yeah, even if it looks a bit like work, a
Hmm.
little bit. Yeah. I do have some wonderful images of you, in
Oh
your
yeah.
life,
Yeah.
blending all of these things together. So I might share those because
Yeah. Now's a good
I
time for that.
wonder if you have any thoughts on how you integrate it in your life. Well, you've spoken about finding those moments, but I think one thing a lot of people would be looking for is a consistency in their practice. And you say you stitch every day. So even if you have any tips for people listening, and they may be stitchers or they may be some other kind of artist or just people who want to find those creative moments, do you have any thoughts about sort of how someone can do that? Juggle the things.
Yeah. I mean, I work on so many different things at once. I hear folks sometimes saying, um, "Oh, I have so many works in progress. I need to finish them." And I just don't see anything wrong with that. I have so many pieces I'll never finish, and that's fine. It's just part of the process. And so I have so many different pieces. So let's say, this evening, my family is going, or my kid has a doctor's appointment, and I know that I'm going to be probably waiting for a while in the waiting room, and which is often, I just I say, I'll be the one to take them, and I'll always have like just a little kit, like a little tin with some thread, always a tiny pair of scissors, and I have that ready to go. Um, and then I'll just always have a few scraps ironed, or so then there's always something small, or there's something that's like always needing to be quilted off to the side. So if I know that I'm going to be in a car or somewhere, I can kind of spread something on my lap. It just depends also if I want people to come up to me and talk to me, but sometimes I just want to like be at the tennis lesson watching my kid and people not really coming up and like, "What are you quilting? I mean, what are you knitting?" People always say, "What are you knitting?" I'm like, "I
What are
don't
you
know how to
knitting?
knit." But sometimes it's really fun to have that conversation. Sometimes you just want to be alone and be that one parent not on their phone, just sewing, just kind of like that's my alone time. So I think
Yeah,
there's just lots of pieces in different progress, different amounts of progress, little needle books with somewhere to tuck the needle in so you don't poke your finger. And then I have a winter coat that has purposely big pockets, and the one pocket always has sewing stuff in it, just little
yeah,
scraps.
yeah,
So that's how I shop for coats. I look for the coats with the big pockets. And I also have a very supportive partner. I don't think he or I like to be the drivers when we go on road trips, but I think it's kind of understood that like I would really value being in the passenger seat. so that I can sew, because that's just an
Yeah.
amazing amount of time. I love being able to sew in the car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that.
Stolen moments. Yep. I love it. And I think there's so many ways we could do that in life for lots of different purposes to, squeezing our creative practice in or taking a breath or whatever it might be. Yeah. There's a few comments coming in from people
Oh,
watching. Carol says, yes, busy hands, happy heart. I love that, Carol.
it's gonna be a t-shirt.
And Anna, similar. Yes, busy hands, quiet mind. I think we need
Yeah.
to maybe put these on a mug or something.
I know. I know. Got some merch coming in from that.
Yeah. And Ali,
Oh.
totally agree. Meditation in movement. Yeah,
Hey,
wonderful.
hi, Allie. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing is for when when my kids were younger, because I really was, what's 2019? How many years ago? Six. So they were smaller
There's a
for,
few years in there that's sort
yeah,
of
I know
like,
time is so strange. So when they were younger, so as we know, what happened in 2020 was when I was really, some of us either like artistic practice changed in some way, and mine was just like I was just making everything. I wasn't even thinking about what I was sewing together, but I was doing a lot of like asking my kids to cut into the quilts. So I have some quilts where I think I discovered mending during that time. Like I
mhm.
always knew things were mended, but I started thinking it was so cool, and I had to learn how to do visible mending, and I took lots of workshops during the early stages of the pandemic, when everything was online, and so I was having my kids cut into the quilts, so they would be like, "Are you sure?" Like into a quilt top.
Yeah.
And then just doing things like laying a piece of fabric on the ground and letting it sit there for a few days, like while we were living at home, and seeing how maybe something fell on top, or the dog walked across it. And then I would use that to kind of fuel like where I'd put things. So I kind of was trying to play around with like how I could
Wow.
collaborate with them. But anymore, they don't really want to collaborate. I used to have them draw on my fabric a lot on my quilts with like a water soluble blue pen.
Mhm.
And anymore, they're just like, no, I don't really want to do that anymore. Like, oh no. So I have to trick them to collaborate with me. But so I have a lot of lovely like drawings in my quilts that my kids did. And, a lot of those pictures are just those are really special memories. So
Yeah. I love that. You used to be able to get them to help you. Now you just maybe have to strategically leave things around so they
yeah.
bump into them.
Yeah,
I'm
I think it's
imagining you.
too much pressure. So if
Yeah.
I now want their work, like their drawings or something now they're doing like a lot of photography or like animations. So there could be ways that I like, if they know they're not doing it for mom's quilt, the pressure's too big there. I could just like say, hey, can I put this into my quilt? They do a lot of drawings that I see quilts in. I'm just like, whoa, this drawing looks like a quilt.
Yeah.
This is so cool, And so
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, maybe they're influenced. They won't
Yeah.
say it, but maybe they're influenced by seeing, my quilts around. And yeah,
Yeah.
goes both ways.
It's interesting because you spend your days as a high school teacher in
Oh, yeah.
art, and you're also bringing your kids into your practice where you can or where they're willing. It's incredibly generous, Amanda. Some people want to squirrel away and like this is their creative time, but it sounds like you're so community driven with your making and your art practice. Do you ever want to just squirrel away, or are you always looking for those community sort of moments?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am an introvert. Like I refuel myself by being alone. I do love alone moments, and I think sewing is really a time for me to listen to audiobooks. And I mean, I can do that while I'm present with my family. Like I can be in here and I just have an audiobook on low. And
Mm.
it's that to me is still alone time. And when it gets nicer here pretty soon in the US, we're going to have summer coming up, hopefully sooner comes soon. I spend a lot of time just sitting in the backyard. So there's a lot of little sitting areas. It's a small backyard, but there's, the kids will be playing. I still feel like I'm alone, even though they're not like sitting next to me. They're not sitting next to me talking to me, but I'm still like able to see. So
Yeah.
I do really need alone time, and sewing is really that time.
Yeah.
However, yeah, I don't I sometimes I'm like, I wish I could do this all the time, just be alone in here and sew, but I think about a lot of my work, and I'm not sure it would be what it would be without my high school students and just
Yeah.
like being in that studio atmosphere, even though I'm not like directly making all the projects they're making, but I'm just like around makers all day. And I'm around
Yeah.
makers that are like very new to everything I give them. Like that's
Yeah.
just what I find is cool when
Yeah.
just seeing. I love introductory classes, like, because I think a lot of people think art or even quilts are one thing, and then I like when people like surprise themselves about what they can do. So I don't know,
Yeah.
it's fun to watch, and it's very energizing, and it makes me want to just go home and make stuff. So
Yeah, there was I might show this now. I was going to show it a bit later, but it seems connected to what we're talking about. You posted about some work with your students, and I'll actually just read sort of the caption that you wrote, and then I'll show the images that connect to that. You said, "My students use placemats when they paint, and it makes cleanup easier at the end of class. These are just pieces of bulletin board paper cut up to the size of a placemat, and we reuse them frequently. So now they're getting to be so beautiful, like collaborative art making, little moments of paint from different students, different projects, a recorded history of custom colours mixed. A few months ago, I photographed some of them and got them printed onto some fabric by Spoonflower and made a throw quilt. Last year, I used some of this printed fabric and added some quilted parts to a thrifted denim top." And I just think this so beautifully shows how you sort of create this loop of connection, whether it's the being in the studio environment at school that inspires you at home, or actually using the drop cloths from the classroom to inspire thrifting and mending or making something old new again. Do you want to speak to that at all?
yeah, I mean, I always say, like, if my students don't get anything out of this class, like this year, I hope that they leave just knowing that art can be made out of anything. And just like the things that you may look past could be art. So like they saw me taking pictures of those placemats that they like, I think at first they just want to throw them away. But now they just know. I think I don't really talk about it much, but I think that I've created a culture that I'm not saying I save everything. I don't want the classroom to be a messy space where I just like my cardboard collection is a little out of hand sometimes, but we love cardboard, not glue. But I think that I just want them to see that they don't have to go to the art store to buy materials. I don't want it to be something that's like only for people that like have $100 gift certificate to an art store that can make art.
Mm,
Like I think
mm,
that's how I used to think of it when I was younger. And I think I just want them to see the art can just be made with everything. So I think the placemats, it's just hard not to see everything that they leave behind. For example, just like after collaging in the classroom, like with magazines, just finding little pieces of paper on the table and just seeing just different shapes, I think are really interesting. And also when we use fabric, they always cut, like I buy bed sheets and things and wash them and take them to my classroom. And they cut like the middle of the fabric out. Like they don't, like we would be like, oh, I think a lot of us would be like, oh, we bought this fabric, so we're gonna make sure we cut from the corner, and then you have the other part. But they don't, it's just not, when they're talking to their friends and they're just excited, they just put their template, because we don't really I just give them pieces of cardboard and say, cut the fabric in this approximate size. Or I say, like, cut a piece of fabric about the size of your hand, but they just do it right out of the middle. And I don't really care too much because I don't buy new fabric. It's mostly donated, but then it leaves these really cool shapes.
Yeah.
So if kids keep cutting around these little pieces that they keep cutting the middle out, then you've got all these really interesting negative shapes. And sometimes I just throw those in my pocket because I'm like, they just want to throw them away. Or I go in the I just look in the garbage. I'm like, oh, they think they can't use this. Okay, I'm going to take this home and use this in my work. So I think it's fun to just discover things that would be like thrown away.
Yeah.
And use those, yeah.
Yeah, that freedom too of just, which I guess it comes from either knowing something's hasn't cost you a lot of money, perhaps, but the freedom of just cutting and it makes you wonder, well, what would we all produce or make if we completely removed the idea of the cost of materials or the cost of time even? Just had freedom. Yeah.
I think that's perfect, Joe. Like that's something I've said before. I've noticed with like, I think once I had some funding from a grant to buy white canvases. I mean, the kids were so excited. Like, what? She's got these white stretched primed canvases that are like what real paintings are on. You know, they think like that has to be, a painting has to be on that, and it's wrapped in plastic. And I just remember they all opened them and they're just like didn't want to do anything on them. And I was also like, I don't, that's scary. I know I don't, and so I was like, come on, just draw something. So I think the same with white paper. And I think that's what I noticed about myself. Like when I would go to the fabric store, like my mom did, and get the yardage cut and pay the money and maybe some coupons and go home, I would just like save that for a important project someday. And so it wouldn't happen because like, you're like, well, someday that really important thing will happen. And so I started just cutting cardboard for my students. And at first I thought, oh, they're going to think I don't have any money, which is kind of true. I mean, there's not a ton of money but also it's like, I noticed they were like, well, if I mess up or if I don't love this, I'll just make another piece out of that piece of cardboard. And there's always cardboard, and the stuff they were making was just so incredible. And so I noticed the same thing with me. Like you're saying, like just cutting into like during the pandemic, I like ran out of fabric because I was going nuts, like making so many quilts. And so I had these like, I always have bags, garbage bags full of clothes I'm donating, and it's like I'm slowly filling it up and then I'm going to donate it. And I had a couple bags in the hallway upstairs, and I just started digging into those and cutting them up. And I was making so much cool stuff because I wasn't like afraid of, it wasn't precious. It was,
yeah.
A lot of
I think
freedom.
that's a good segue to ask about how you repurpose materials and where you source your materials. And we had an audience question. I think you may have sort of almost answered it already, but we had Claudia Leon write in and ask us, do you ever combine different fabric textures on your quilts? I've always just stuck with cotton, but I'm curious about your experience. I have some wools and linens I'd love to use. So, yeah.
Use them!
Do it.
I remember when I first started my Instagram account, I was like, oh, I'm going to start an art account. And I'm not going to say quilts because I'll probably get tired of quilts after like a month, because that's how I always was. I would just move. So, which has not changed. I'm still always going to be quilting. But I remember I started it and I posted a quilt I was working on where I was combining a knit, like a stretchy knit, something kind of shimmery. It was just stuff I had laying around and that had just been in scraps in my classroom that students were throwing away. They're just too small. And I posted a picture of it, and I was afraid to say that it wasn't quilting cotton. Isn't that silly? I mean, I'm just like, why was I so afraid of being judged, And I mean, now I'm just like, I think what was helpful for me is that while I did have a mom who's just an incredible quilter that I learned a lot from, I didn't know enough about fabric to know better. Like I didn't even know that the difference between synthetic and natural fabric. I mean, now I'm starting, not because like I read a book about it, but just because I like yesterday I melted part of my quilt under the iron, and I'm like, oh, whoops, I'm gonna have to put something over that because that's synthetic. I got some plastic in there. But I mean, it wasn't until like I just experienced. So I think just being new like to quilting, I didn't like have a fear of using something that was wrong. So I was, yeah, I just put anything together. Now I can say that I've changed a bit, that I really want the fabric to feel good. So if it's too thick, like I used to just sew anything together when I first started, but now it's like I want it to feel good with a needle. I want it to
Yeah.
like, but I love when it just like stretches weird. Like I love like a maybe a fuzzy, firm piece of fabric with like something that's really sheer and like what that does. Oh yeah, here we got a
I'll
bunch.
show a few, and these might be slightly different to what you're mentioning, but I think they give people a sense of the combination of materials and techniques.
Definitely. So I love vintage, like that's a vintage linen tablecloth. So now that I know linen's so lovely, you know, it makes it a little more expensive to go to the thrift store and look for the linen or to the antique mall, but yeah, now I know. And then also just embracing like those folds that you see, just like ironing them down, and where do they just like fold, and then that maybe that's a seam. Just kind of like a lot of chance happening. I think that happens more when you mix material. And also when I buy, some people ask me this sometimes, when I buy fabric from the thrift store, I and it's like dry clean only, which a lot of the things maybe you're describing, wool and things, could be. I just put everything, I wash everything. So I don't even look at the labels because I figure I just want it to feel, I mean, it always kind of has a weird smell sometimes, like even after you wash it, but I don't mind. That's kind of fun just to know that it was somewhere else, had another life. But I I just wash it, and a lot of times like I know up here I have this like nearby. I use it all the time. It's like a plasticky, almost like swimsuit fabric, like gold. And after I washed and dried it, it like stuck together, it like melted together a little bit, but it has this cool, I use it all the time. It has this cool like effect, just kind of worn effect. But a lot of that's just, I like that to all happen before I start quilting with it. Um, and it may shrink, it may felt, you know, if it was wool, it may, once it goes through the wash. So I'm not worried about mixing fabric because of, but then again, a lot of my quilts aren't made to be used. They're, you know, maybe made for the wall.
So
Different.
is it, you're extremely resourceful, obviously, you know, you're looking at things or looking at potential mistakes that happen and going, oh, cool, that might work here. So with repurposing, is it because, or there might be a few reasons, is it because you love the mixture of materials? I think that's coming through. Is it also the sustainability side of things, of not buying something new when you can reuse something that already exists? Are there a few layers to that in the way you format it?
Definitely a few layers. I don't think that when now I've been like repurposing things in art with my students for 25 years. I mean, I think I was doing that when I first started teaching, just because it was just there. Like it was because of cost. So definitely the later on, I mean, I was definitely a shopper of fast fashion years ago, you know, and now it's like I can't ever buy anything new to wear or to, it just feels gross. Like I just see there's so much stuff. And then I get to go shopping for clothes, and then I'm like, oh, well, this shirt I know is going to get cut up within the next year. So it's like I get to wear for a while, and then I'm like, I'm going to use that in a quilt now. So I think that's really fun because it's like it has double usage, and it fulfills my like, you know, my want to hunt through a thrift store or an estate sale, like a garage sale, and find secondhand things and just that treasure hunt. But then also know that like I can always like you also use it for art. Like I can wear it and use it. So I think, yeah, the sustainability conversation like was a lot later, but definitely it's like, cool, I'm glad I'm already doing this. This feels so great. It's like another reason why I love quilting, you know, like, so I think but it didn't definitely start that way. It started because like it was free and there's no pressure. Like I have too many things in my life that I put a lot of pressure on myself with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and I also I'm a rule follower. I overdo things sometimes. I'm like a perfectionist in things. I mean, I'm getting better, but I think quilting
Mm-hmm.
is just the way I just really am free. And I
What
just
a
like fascinate.
fantastic idea, because so many people will think of quilting as this thing that needs to be very traditional, very precise, very like there's so many rules to a traditional
Mm-hmm.
quilt and how you make it, which is brilliant, like some
Mm-hmm.
people find so much joy in that, but that you've found freedom in quilting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Is
don't
there
have
also
room. Yeah.
sorry.
No, I was just saying I don't have room in my life. Like I need that balance, right?
Mm,
There's already things that I have to be like really like I
mhm,
like to be like organized in parts of my life. Well, I mean, not organized, but follow rules and yes, parts of my life. But I do have to say I like love traditional quilts. I have some vintage quilts. I'm just if I can't sleep at night, I'm on eBay looking at vintage quilt tops because I just love the repeated blocks. I don't really do it in my work. It's not, but I just have such an appreciation for it. And I took a class. This was kind of cool because I think of a lot of quilters is learning how to be really precise and then trying to break away from it. A lot of people say,
mm,
well, I want to be more free, but I learned this way. So for me,
mhm.
it's like I didn't really learn. I'm going the opposite. Like, I'm not saying I'm trying to be more precise, but I think it's kind of fun to learn how to do something in a really traditional, precise way so I can kind of see how my technique is different
Mhm.
and and then I kind of learn some stuff about myself like, oh, this doesn't bring me joy, but I want to know how. I think it's really hard. Like basically I think so much of that is hard. Like I couldn't like machine quilting like is fascinating, but I would be terrible at it and I've tried it and I'm not very good at it. It's just not at that position to sit in and then also just like yeah, it's just not there's so many things to do in the world and it's like I don't need another thing to learn.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna stick with but I appreciate the skill it takes to do all of those things. I love it. I love looking at it and talking with people about it. But for my
Yeah.
practice, it has to be more painterly, improvisational. I need more chance
Mhm.
and more surprises and more like experimentation. Um, just for that my practice. Um,
Yeah. Anna has asked in the chat, do you teach your school students quilting as part of their art course? So I'm imagining that might be the style of quilting you're talking about, the free stitching or improvisation. Or do you actually teach traditional skills as well, Amanda, and wrap those in?
I mean, I think it's really great to teach them uh, like a sampler of different types of embroidery stitches. I actually have 2 textile classes this year. So that's about 70 students that I have. I see every day from September to June. So yes, they're making a quilt. but
Mhm.
but for them, they're very new to sewing and a lot of them didn't I think it was the last class available, maybe for some of them. Like they're all filled up and they're like, well, what's this art class? I'm going to sign up for this. So what I love that. And I love having no requirement, like no prerequisite. It's like anyone, it's a very beginner introductory course, which I love. And so we do a lot of really mixed media because I don't want to make them I don't want to make it like a chore hand sewing. But what's really cool is that if you have 35 students in a class, you can't have like that many sewing machines, especially when it's not like a dedicated room. So
Mm,
what I
mm.
have are four, plus I don't know how to fix sewing machines really. So I have 4 sewing machines
Oh,
that I
yeah.
don't break out to the end of the year and I let them use them. So we work on like little blocks for each project. So basically, we're going to spray paint and use a stencil on this one. And then we'll do a few rows of quilting so it stays to the main thing. You know, that's a lot of stitches. 3 rows of running stitch for them. And then we're going to do, you know, whatever I have done. Someone donated all these ribbons, and they love ribbons. And so we all measured our height with ribbon so we could see like how tall we are in high school. And then they have to applique that ribbon down in any way they want.
Oh,
So
wow.
I just try to think of, it's like my brain's always thinking of like these ways to kind of trick and engage them in quilting. And they're always surprised. Wait, this is a quilt? Yeah, it's a quilt. They love clays, and we have a kiln, so we do a little ceramic pieces, and then we sew those into a piece. So no, it's not going to be a quilt they're going to cuddle up with. It's a little heavy and awkward, but it's really cool. And then at the end of the year, I break out the sewing machines, and they get really excited. Like all of a sudden, it's going to be so easy, and they sit down and they say, I want to just hand sew this. It'd be so much easier to like, and I'm like, oh, A+. I love that. You know, I love that discovery on their own when they realize like, it's not what they thought. You know, I think a lot of teenagers, well, a lot of adults too, come in to the class thinking like, this is what I can do and can't do. And this is what the class is going to be about. Like they think that they have it all figured out. And I just want them to be open, like everyone, right, in life should do this. Like just be more open, and like we're always learning, and you never know. You may surprise yourself.
Yep. Oh, I mean, brilliant. The next generation of quilters, it's fantastic. And it feels like the beginning of some sort of story, like it was the last class available, or is it going to be there?
I don't know. Maybe I'm just guessing, because the other ones, drawing and painting is very straightforward. I think some of them are like, what's a textile? What's a fiber? Like,
well, if any of you are listening out there, take these classes. I tell you.
Now the word's getting out, and a couple. I had them they made a quilt last year, and then this year, a couple students sat there and said, "I took this class because I saw that we get to make a quilt." And a couple kids like wore them out of the class the first day or the last day of school, like a cape. And it was just so moving.
So cool.
Because a lot of teenagers they don't think their work is good enough, and they just want to like give it to someone or throw it away. I mean, I always have them photo document, because not every artwork is meant, it might be ephemeral. It may not be meant to last forever, but I feel like with the amount of time we spend on it, I don't tell them they have to keep it, but no one doesn't want to keep it, because they know like so much of themselves went into that.
Yeah. So, they may not know it, but they'll have that forever.
Yeah.
I would love to chat about some of your actual finished quilts. We've covered off such beautiful ideas about the making and your teaching, and I feel like people might be sitting here thinking, all right, show us some quilts.
Yeah, let's see.
So let's talk about this piece first. This is centering from last year. And one question that's always popular from the people who watch and listen to our interviews is to understand how much of it you've planned and how much is improvised along the way. And I'll show a detail as well. I'd love to hear about this work.
Yeah, so this quilt right now can be seen in person in Heidi Park's mid-career retrospective called Soft Magic up in Wisconsin at the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts. It's a show that just opened, and I was a student of hers, and she invited me to put a piece in. And this piece I finished last summer. I was thinking about Hawaiian style applique, and just being really being curious about like taking a kind of like how you create a snowflake out of paper, like folding and folding and folding, and then cutting and then opening it back up and getting like that symmetry. My work is not, I don't like measure. I mean, I measure, but I measure with like my hands or with like the stripes are always ripped from like the size of the wood on my floor, like the wood planks, wood floorboards.
Mm-hmm.
So like I measure a lot with just things that are around. Like two finger, like a lot of my quilting is 1 thumb or 2 fingers wide. And so I think I wanted to see what it looked like, symmetry looked like that wasn't perfect. So the way it works for me with improv is no, I don't ever know what something's going to look like when it's finished, but I like to be really in control of certain things. So like I always make a pile of the kind of like they say pulling fabrics or pulling, like I get a palette ready. Other colors may pop in there as I feel like it needs it, but I'll start with some kind of a set of fabrics. And usually lately I've just really been into 80s prints. I mean, I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, and just like some solid colors, just like real pale mixed with bold, just kind of different intensities. So I usually like limit myself. So I don't want to just say like anything can make its way in, because I know as a teacher, when I tell my students to limit their color palette, there's a lot more success, because otherwise they're going to use like every color. Because that sounds fun, right? Let's make a painting. I want to use every single color. But that doesn't always make for a great work. So I know that. So I do that to myself. It's like I'm giving myself rules. So then and then the other thing I said to myself was, okay, I'm going to start with all these. I like to think of blue and black as the same color. I think it's kind of interesting. I think it's because when I was in the 90s, there was like a rule of like you couldn't wear navy with black, or you couldn't wear two black. Does this sound familiar? I don't know. Maybe it
Yeah.
was just the weird crowd I hung out
Oh,
with.
look, the 80s and 90s, like,
The
where
girls
would we
are so
start with all
mean
the
to
rules?
like, don't wear two blacks together, because if one was washed more, it's gonna be too faded compared to like the new black pants. I don't know. But I purposely love to do that. I love like really worn, washed black fabric. And so I cut all those blocks to an approximate size of each other, those backgrounds, and then I just found these different prints. Some are antique, some are like 80s prints, and some are just solids from bed sheets and pillowcases. And I just said, okay, I'm allowed to fold it twice. So I fold it in half, the
Mhm.
hamburger way, they say. And then you fold it again, the hot dog. You fold it once, then you fold it again. And I was allowed to cut it once on the outside and once on the inside to make like a negative space. So that's what I told myself. Like, this is your rule. You need to do 20, what is it, 25 of them. And so that's what I did, all those shapes. And then I just appliqued them by hand onto those separate blocks. Um,
Fantastic.
so that was kind of the fun challenge. And so they're all slightly different. They're symmetrical. Of course, Hawaiian style applique is so much more elaborate, so many more folds, but it was kind of like that's what kind of kicked it off. And then it was the beginning of the summer, and I have the summer off. I did a little bit of summer camp teaching, but we do a lot of camping as our family. So I like to take things. I think there's even a picture of me, like in the car sewing on
Yeah,
one of these,
there is.
but
Where is it? Here it is.
so I was gonna leave them without the centers stitch, because they looked really cool with just the negative space,
Mhm.
like a donut, like an elaborate donut. And I said, you know what? No, I have all summer. I was starting to collect wool, like crewel tapestry yarn and thicker needles. So it's just like a little thicker. And it's kind of like I was discovering, which a lot of people already know this if you knit, but I didn't. So I discovered if you spray it with water and then you iron it with the heat, it expanded, it like felts it. And I was like, such a
Right.
surprise, such a beautiful surprise. So I said, I'm going to fill in all these holes with abstract improvisational stitching. So that's my big glob of yarn there. And I mean, I went all over. People were even sending me like, oh, I have a bunch of that from the 70s. You want it? And I was like, yes. So then just it like that was the improv. So it's like there's definitely some strict rules I give myself, and then other thing, I don't know. And then some things that are very, that I want to happen by chance, that I just want to, because that's a surprise. I don't think that I would enjoy. I think there's too many things that I do in my life where like I know what the end result's going to be, and so I think with quilting, I want to know it's going to have the colors that I want. I have a hard time sewing with fabrics that someone else tells me I have to use to make the quilt, and that's it. Like I want some control with that, but I also like to have that, like, I have no idea what's going to look like, so I just can't help but do this. I just don't want to sleep because I just want to keep working on this so I can see what happens. And that's what's so exciting about it. Yeah. The surprise.
This idea of the repeating motif too, but with subtle differences. I'm thinking about another work that we can show. I'm not sure if this one has a title, but in my mind, it's just bows.
Yeah, I'm not the best at, like, when I submit a work for like a contest or like a show or like and I don't know, to be possibility to be in a show. I do come up with the title and artist statement, but sometimes if I don't like record it really well, I'm not the most organized with that, I might come up with a different title. But a lot of times in work, I wish my titles were really beautiful, but sometimes it is something like Blue Bows. That's probably the title. I have it written somewhere, but yeah, this is a fun piece to talk about because in my classroom, I'm always telling my students about cliche expected imagery. Like if you don't help a student, or I guess this goes for anyone, adults, all of us, if you don't like develop an idea, you might take like the first thought and it might be expected or cliche. And so, it's kind of like, sometimes I do a project at the beginning of the year where I tell students, we're just going to get it all out of our system. We're going to make the most cliche, expected artwork, and you're not going to think much or put much meaning. You're just going to, and so it's a lot of smiley faces and rainbows, and now it's bows. There's a lot of bow motifs everywhere. And so I think I kind of was rethinking that. Like, why do I have these rules? Like, you can't draw hearts. Because I always say, it's like, you're not putting enough thought into it. Let's think of a more creative way to show love. Like, let's think of something more personal to you. But then I'm like, well, but what if you did do something expected, like a bow, but you just did a ton of them? Or you made one really big, like change the scale? Or what are some ways you can take cliche imagery? So now I'm like breaking my own rules that I have in my classroom because I've been teaching for so long that I'm like, what are the things that I used to say you're not allowed to do? And now I'm like, I'm going to do them. And I'm going to just do them like really maximalist, like over the top. So that's what this
almost
is
like
about.
pop art, just embracing the fact it is what it is. We all know it. It's so familiar. Here's a close-up. We had a question from, let me see, Joan. Are your quilts completely hand-stitched or are they pieced on the machine and hand-quilted? So that's a question that's come in, not necessarily to do with this piece, but this one looks entirely hand-stitched. Am I right with that?
Yeah, this one's hand stitched. A lot of the stitching on this, like the back, because I like those layers, the bows are on top of the patchwork because I wanted there to be like a background and the bows to be like floating on top. So yeah, I think all my quilts are different, but this one is definitely a technique where I'll stitch right into the batting, kind of like a quilt as you go, and kind of like stitching and flipping. So by hand, which you could do on machine, but I like to get that wobbliness of the seams that I can get with stitching. But no, sometimes I'll do some machine piecing and then I'll stop and I'll applique that by hand onto something. So I'll have a lot of my work has like, it just depends. Like if I see a bunch of quilts that were machine pieced and I get inspired, I'll be like, I'm sitting down at the machine tomorrow, but I can only last so long. And then I might like, yeah, I don't know. But mostly by hand is what I'm trying to say. But I'm not against machine. I think sometimes I just get excited to use the machine. But then if it runs out of like the bobbin runs out, I'll just be like, I don't feel like, no, I'm gonna go back to hand, you know, like, so, or if it's covered up with stuff like sitting on the machine or the sewing machine table. I have a very
Yeah,
nice industrial machine that
you
was donated,
do.
or I bought it from an artist for a very good price, like very cheap, and an artist that I really admire in Chicago. And I just wanted to have, I was like, I don't know, this thing looks really heavy, and what happens if but it is really nice. But I don't use it a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit of a combo. I guess it is a good way of getting some large surfaces
Mhm.
put together
Yeah.
for you to then layer up. Yeah,
Yes, or drawn. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've got a few more images which I'll just flick up there. They're a random assortment of different things, Amanda, but I think they
Okay.
show just a good sort of a
Mhm.
combination of how you integrate materials and you hand stitch and you
Yeah.
combine unexpected fabrics together.
Yeah, a lot of when you use a lot of unexpected fabrics, different weights, sometimes having like a foundation fabric or like a batting to actually stitch into can
Mm-hmm.
help. And this is, yeah, and then you can, once you have that, this I feel like has some machine stitching, and like you were saying, to get that down and then being
Mm-hmm.
able to. But I do know that a lot of those little applique squares are
Yeah.
because the fabric that a lot of times they're out of necessity, because I like that really vintage old curtain that's like an off-white in the lower left hand
Mhm.
corner is has like a very subtle print on it, was like just falling apart as I was stitching. And it was making like holes, and so I'm like, well, I guess I have to applique something on. So a lot of that happens, for that reason, which I think that's important to go through life like that. It's like, I think that's taught me a lot, because you just don't have control over everything, and sometimes you just have to be open to, like,
Yeah.
be flexible. Maybe it's not what I thought,
Yeah.
especially working with weird fabrics. So
Yeah. I love some of these, how you sort of extending the fabric design. Look, we've got some bows in this one, but
I think
with
this
sort
one
of almost a
really inspired.
drawing stitch. There's a few more images that
Mhm.
convey this idea where you're drawing motifs with, what would you call it, a running or a cantha? I'm
Yeah,
not
I
sure on
think
the
this is
terminology.
a just a running and back stitch kind of alternating, just to get the different. I really love, drawings that have different weights, like where the
Mhm.
ink bleeds out a little bit more in parts,
Yes,
or skips, or like a tattoo that has like different weight line. I love. And so I think I was thinking about that. And this
yeah,
also has like a sheer, that's another thing, you can do layers, kind of like what you can do with paints, like we were saying, like paintings. There's scraps underneath, and then there's a layer of like a sheer
yeah,
drapery, and then there's the stitching on top of all of that. So
holding it all together. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, different.
yeah.
This is another one, yeah, with my kids. My child did these drawings, and that was
Mm.
after it was pieced. I don't think it was quilted yet, but it was pieced and on batting, and then I had him do some sketches. We were in the backyard, so a lot of this stuff is things he saw in our backyard, I guess. So
Mm.
yeah.
Do you use the sentimental fabrics as well? So I mean, capturing your kids' drawings in stitch is a beautiful idea. Do you also use sentimental fabrics in your work?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some special fabrics. I have to be careful, because I do have some I'm really into bark cloth prints lately, like vintage fabrics that were not in my family, but that I find, and then I just don't want to use them because I just love them so much, but
Mm.
I'll just use little pieces. But my grandmother's 8th grade graduation dress, this peach dress, I've used that in a quilt, just pieces of it. I still have pieces of it left. I have my wedding dress that I really want to make a quilt out of.
Oh, good
And then I'm like,
idea.
yeah. And I'm
I've
like,
never
what
thought
is,
of that.
yeah. And then I'm like, and of course, when I get this idea, I get so excited where I'm like, And then other people might want their wedding dresses into quilt. And then of course I'm like, well, once I'm done, I'll probably be done with that. You know,
Oh,
like,
you've
okay.
turned it into a whole cottage industry.
I think every time I have an idea, I just get so excited that it's going to become this new chapter for the next like 10 years, you know, but then I come back to earth and realize, okay, let's just see what I feel like doing tomorrow. Amanda,
Yeah.
calm down.
Just going to keep my hands busy.
My wedding dress is just like it's nothing, I don't know. It's not a really traditional huge dress. It's just like a prom dress that has some beads and it's kind of like off-white, but I've definitely wanted to play around with that. But otherwise, I don't know. Besides antique quilt blocks, but yeah, I think I haven't really. Oh, I have done some commissions where I've worked with. I had a friend reach out to me last summer or about a year ago, I guess, and I used her. Her father passed, and I used his clothes and made 2 wall quilts for her mother, and that was really special. That was really interesting because I had never really worked with something so, but it was cool because she sent me just a bunch and told me the ones that were most special and what I could use with them, and it was fun to have that freedom, and to even bring in some of my I like, if I work with something special, I like it to complement with something that's like a bed sheet I found at the store. Like, I like the combination where there's those special moments, but then there's just like these like areas of just like that support it or that complement it or something.
That makes sense. Yeah, beautiful. We are nearing the end of our chat today.
That's sad. I could talk to you forever.
I know, I could too. There's so many paths of this conversation where I thought, oh, if only we had another 8 hours.
Part 2 next week. No.
Part 2, part 3.
No, we'll chat sometime. Maybe we'll sit together and chat sometime.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I'd like to ask one more question before we do our little every artist must segment, which I'll explain in a moment. I'd just like to ask if you have any. I think you've imparted a lot of beautiful thoughts about bringing your quilting practice into your life and how you combine it, and also how you bring a quilting practice to students. If someone is watching or listening to this interview today who's never quilted, do you have a starting point for them? Because in the introduction, I said a warning, be careful. This is going to be very tempting. So if someone's now sitting thinking, oh, okay, this quilting thing, it's not what I thought it was. You know, do you have any, just a few little starting points for someone?
Yeah. Well, my first quilt class was from Heidi Parks, and it was just really freeing. So I think, you know, maybe taking a couple little workshops, but I think also just I think I used to think that I had to know a lot about quilting to pick out fabrics. Like, I thought that I couldn't do that step, but then I reminded myself, like, I get up in the morning and I get dressed on my own, and that's really fun. And also I love to put wild things on, and then a lot of times before I leave the house, I just am wearing black or blue because that's what I like to wear. So I think it's fun if you think about quilting or putting fabric together, like if that's something you think that would be fun to try, just kind of think of it like getting dressed and getting excited, like you're going somewhere really fun and you want to be like, I don't know, something that makes you really happy, and put those fabrics in a little pile. Like, start with your closet and those things that you never wear. Come on, let's be honest.
Start chopping.
Chop it up. Maybe put it in a bag for a couple days so you don't feel too sad. Chop it up and just like try stitching and flipping it and just noticing the shapes, especially when a lot of people say, well, how do you get all those interesting shapes? I'm like, well, if you start with a piece of rectangle fabric from this that you buy new, it's going to be hard to see shapes. Like for me, it's like I always start with like a garment. So the fabrics I keep using my hands so much here. garments are, when you cut them apart, you have all these really interesting shapes like that go into making a garment, like the sleeves. So start with that and see if there's anything that draws your eye, and just sew two fabrics together. But
Yeah.
I love to answer questions about, sewing, and I think just giving yourself permission to try,
Yeah.
just at least just making a patchwork where you just sew pieces together that you don't really measure or think about too much.
Yeah.
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 That's how I'd start. Yeah. That's a good
It's so
question.
much more accessible to
Mhm.
the fewer materials you need, right? The needle, the thread, a couple of pieces of fabric, probably some
Yeah.
scissors, but not necessarily a rotary cutter.
No, yeah, no. I think those are dangerous. Well, I mean, they are. Yeah, but I did use them in a workshop. I'm like, oh, now I see why people use this. This is pretty nice.
Yeah, they are. They're
um, but yeah, I
handy.
think just see what excites you about color, and think of it like a painting, or like a magazine. Maybe start with a magazine collage. Like, just take a magazine and don't think about the pictures, but think about just like the colors. Like, don't cut out faces. I think that's the first thing we think when we see a magazine,
Yeah.
like cutting out like faces and objects. But instead of that, just look for textures and just put them together and glue them on a piece of paper and notice like what excites you. And then just go to fabric and do the same thing.
Yeah.
Start there.
Or like your students, just chop it out of the middle. See
Yeah,
what
you can do
happens.
that too.
Okay, so the way we like to end our episodes of Friday Feature Artists is with a little game called Every Artist Must, Amanda.
Okay.
So what we do, it's like a rapid fire round of
Mhm.
questions where we ask you to end a sentence with the first thing that comes to mind. And so the sentence that we start with is the phrase "every artist must," and then I'll give you a keyword and you can just say whatever comes to mind.
Oh dear.
You can take your time, but often it's the first thing that comes to mind that is the most fun or the most random. So are you game for Every Artist Must?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be very good at it, but I'm excited to try it. So we'll see. People can help me out if I need.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, let's give this a try. Every artist must own
A really nice pencil, or like a drawing tool that, like, just for writing notes, that feels
beautiful.
good, like makes a
Yeah.
nice line.
Yeah, I love that. Every artist must create.
A lot of work before they find their voice or their style. Just a lot.
Yep. Every artist must avoid.
Being critical of themselves, because it's not like your last piece that you're gonna make. You're gonna be making hundreds more.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Every artist must learn.
How important process is. If not, it's more important than the product. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
These sentences are long that I'm making. I didn't know that I'd be doing that.
No, it's good. I'm just letting you go. It's all good. And the last one, every artist must remember.
That to never say never, like never say never. Like, I'm never going to, like, what did I say earlier? I'm never going to quilt on a machine. You just can't say that. Your work's always going to be evolving, and you just have to be open to that. Like, what if, that's fun. Like, what if I'm doing something totally different in a year or two? That's cool, So
Yeah.
just don't say never.
Yeah.
You never know.
You never know. You never know. Thank you. You did so well. I think
Thanks.
after this chat today, I'm hoping that no one is listening or watching thinking they will never quilt, because I think you have provided so much inspiration to pick up a needle and thread. And aside from that, I've just had the best time. You bring so much joy through your work and through the way you describe your process. What a privilege. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thanks, Joe. I love talking about this topic, and I hope folks out there just give it a try, and that's exciting, and let me know about
it. Yeah. Let's hear how we go. To our audience who are watching and listening, thank you so much for joining in. Don't forget that we will link to more info and images in our episode description, as well as Amanda's Instagram and website. It's really worth checking out to just understand the full colour and texture and richness of Amanda's practice. But with that, we've come to an end. So thank you so much for joining in. And Amanda, thanks again. And we'll see you for our next Friday feature artist.
Thanks, Joe. Had fun.